think everybody's here. We'll let Justin lead us through this. There'll be a time for question and answers at the end, and certainly you can share some of his stories and you can ask him some of his questions.
Certainly. That being said, if you have a question that you think you're going to forget, don't save it for the very end. You can raise your hand and interrupt me, and I will answer it to the best of my ability. But good morning to you all. It is my privilege and pleasure to be talking to you all about what it means to be a vicar in mission setting, specifically through the lens of my time as a vicar at Good News Lutheran Church in Mount Horeb, Wisconsin. But to start with, I'd love to tell you a little bit about myself. So I grew up in the small town of Sharpsburg, Georgia. It's about 40 minutes south of the city of Atlanta. So we kind of grew up in the shadow of the big city in the suburbs there. My dad is a pastor, so I've kind of been seeing this kind of thing my whole life. Not only is he a pastor, but he's been a supervising pastor to vicars for, I think he's on vicar number 21 now. So I've seen a lot of vicars come and go throughout my growing up. I grew up for the first 14 years of my life in Sharpsburg, going to public school there, attending my home church of Faith Lutheran there. You might not hear an accent on me. That's because both of my parents are from the Midwest. My mom's from Watertown, Wisconsin, and my dad's from Bay City, Michigan. So I'll say y'all, but outside of that, I kind of sound very plain. Anyway, so grew up in Georgia, and then for high school, I attended Luther Preparatory School in Watertown, Wisconsin. That was highlighted in the Wells Connection, one of our ministerial ed schools. So that kind of put me then on the pipeline towards Martin Luther College, our Wells College of Mission and Ministry. So that's where all of the pastor track students, save a few exceptions, go for undergrad. So after 4 years of undergrad there, I earned my Bachelor of Arts, and now I am a student at Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary. This is my wife, Alyssa. We got married about a year and a half ago, so it's been a year and a half of pure bliss. She's a wonderful lady. She helped me put some of this presentation together, so I owe her a lot. And then about 2 months ago, a little over 2 months ago, she gave birth to our firstborn, a daughter, Elaine. And so she's not here today, you might notice, because she's busy at home with little Elaine, and a friend came to visit to come see Elaine, so she stayed local. But she did grow up around this area. She's originally from Greenville. Her dad was a pastor at Emmanuel. Her maiden name is Heckendorf, so her pastor, Joel Heckendorf, was a pastor nearby. Now he's a pastor out in Reno, Nevada. And so when we were in college, when we first started dating, her family moved out there. And then finally, I am a senior this year at Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary. And so what that means is I am in my last year of my training to become a pastor. So come this May, Lord willing, I will receive an assignment from the assignment committee and be assigned to a church somewhere. And so I'm really looking forward to that. But for now, it's my privilege to go look back to my vicar year, the year that I just finished up with. So what is a vicar? I'm sure you all know this, but I don't want to take anything for granted. A vicar is what we call the third year at Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary. So the first year we call junior year, which makes no sense, but it's because they're the youngest guys. The second year at Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary is called your middler year, because you're in between the two other classes that are on campus, the juniors and the seniors. But our third year is the vicar year. And contrary to all the other years where, you know, as a senior or as a junior, as a middler, I'm in school from August to May, and then we have our summer off. Your vicar year is supposed to take up the entire year. From August to August, you are serving in this role as a vicar. So vicar year is a year of practical experience under a supervising pastor. Something else, so doctor of physical therapy. Now, when he was in grad school, one of the years of his classes was a year of clinical experience, where he actually went into a clinic where there were other doctors of physical therapy, and he learned under them in real experience with real people in real situations what it means to be a physical therapist. We do the same thing with our young men who are studying to be pastors. That their third year of grad school, their third year at Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary, they go out, they get an assignment somewhere to be a vicar. Now, the word vicar just means substitute. It's like you're a substitute for your pastor. My dad always used to joke that when we were kids, that You know, when you first get a vicar at the beginning of his year, he's kind of like negative half a pastor, because now the pastor is forced to kind of spend some time work on him, making sure he does things right, making sure his sermons are good. But by the end of the year, it's almost like you've got 3/4 of a pastor, because he's more competent, he's got a year under his belt of experience, and now he knows what he's supposed to do. And so the goal of this year is to take everything we've been doing for the past 6 years in the classroom and finally let us get out and do it for a year. Which is really a wonderful thing, because 6 years of school straight sometimes feels like a lot, especially when you combine that in theory with, if you're going to high school at Luther Prep, they're pushing it and pushing it and pushing it for good reason. But then by the time you're done with Luther Prep, so that's 4 years in the dorm, another 4 years in the dorm at MLC, and then 2 years in the dorm at the seminary. I've got 10 years in the dorm before I got to go out and do something like the practical experience. So that's what makes Vicar Year such an enjoyable and fun time. Now you might be wondering, who gets a vicar? So there's kind of two different practices for how vicars are chosen. There's the standard way, and then there's what I'm going to talk about, which is being a vicar in a mission setting. So the standard way is that a congregation will come together, they will have the resources already at hand, and they will make a request to the seminary to get a vicar. They want a vicar whether because they want to just be there and see a young man get trained up, or for whatever reason. So they'll make the request to the seminary, and maybe after a couple of years, the seminary will approve that request. The other way is the vicar in mission setting. So the main difference between the vicar in mission setting and the standard way is, instead of the congregation approaching the seminary and asking the seminary, hey, we would like a vicar, the seminary approaches specific congregations and supervising pastors in the hopes that these specific guys will train young men in this setting. Now the goal of that is to say, often these congregations are younger. They're mission congregations, and so what that means is that they're not fully self-funded yet. They don't have the money in the bank to sustain both the salary of a full-time pastor and then a full-time vicar, because unfortunately, vicars can be expensive. We have families, we need health insurance, there's a lot of things going on there, and so these congregations may not be able to support a vicar full-time on their own. And so what the seminary does, is they help aid in paying for these vicars in mission setting. Now the goal of doing this is to have, VIM stands for Vicar in Mission Setting. The goal of having these vicar in mission settings is not because these churches are so much better at outreach than other churches, but it's just specifically so that we have pointed experience with young churches that are outreach oriented right now. Every church is a mission church, in the sense that every church is a part of the Great Commission, right? All of us have received the command from Jesus to go out and make disciples of all nations. But Vicar in Mission Setting's goal is to show what it looks like to build up a church from the ground up. So often these churches just had a building built or are in the process of getting a building built. Often these churches are young and small. And so the whole goal here is to get guys experience with mission planting early into their career as pastors rather than later. That's the goal of the Vicar in Mission program. So, about a year and a half ago, it was May, and I'm sitting at seminary call day, and I'm waiting. My name is kind of late in the alphabet, so I'm waiting, and I'm waiting for them to call my name. The way they do it is that midway through the service, we're all sitting down, and President Schrader will get up and read the assignments, just like call day. And so we're waiting for him to read the assignments, and finally I hear my name, Justin Schrader, Good News Lutheran Church, Mount Horeb, Wisconsin. And as you can all imagine, when you're giving up where you're going to live for a year, it's kind of a scary thing to not know where you're going until that moment. And so when I heard Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, my first thought was, where's that? Where's Mount Horeb? I had never heard of the town. I didn't know where it was. All I knew was that it was in Wisconsin. But over the course of a year, I came to really appreciate this wonderful little town in which I got to do some of the Lord's work for a year and work under my supervising pastor. So I'll never be in the NFL draft, but this was my draft day moment. They gave me a t-shirt and had me hold it up like I just had signed a big rookie contract. But this was a really great experience too, because what Good News did was they brought some of their members, and then they also had some of the past vicars who had worked under Pastor Bauer before I had, including the current one. And I got to talk with them and just hear what life was like at Good News already a couple of months before I was going to go to Good News itself. It was a pretty big whirlwind before I ended up at my vicar year, mostly because Alyssa and I got married, and then the first place we were going to live together as a newly married couple was here in Mount Horeb. And so everything was changing all at once. No longer was I just a student, but now I was going to be serving in this role. No longer was I a single guy, but now I was going to be married. And so everything was changing all at once, and it was a very, very exciting time. I think that's me on our first Sunday. We took a picture that's Pastor Bauer and I. So Pastor Bauer was my supervising pastor at Good News. So, what vicar year entails? A vicar in mission setting doesn't necessarily that my vicar year has a very different workload than other vicars. I would say that's pretty standard across the board. Vicars kind of deal in 5 areas, probably the same 5 areas that a pastor deals in. So there's preaching, of course. Starting out, we preach probably every 2 to 3 weeks, but by the end of the year, we're preaching every other week or sometimes every week when the pastor really wants to give us a little bit of hard work. There's teaching, so you think things like confirmation class and catechism. Vicars are responsible for teaching this. Bible information class, right? The path into membership at a church. Normal Bible study. So I was responsible for 3/4 of our teen Bible study and 1/4 of our adult Bible study. And so what that meant was that every time I was coming up with a new Bible study from scratch, I'd write an outline for it, then I'd write those individual lessons every week and teach them to the teens, and then 1/4 of the time I'd switch over and work on the lesson that Pastor Bauer was teaching to the adults. So it got me a lot of experience working both with young kids and with the adults who attended our Bible studies. So there's preaching, teaching, and then there's what I would call inreach, outreach, and the administrative work. So inreach, of course, is anything you do among the people of your congregation to continue fostering the relationships, the brotherhood and sisterhood that we have in Christ, whether those be through small groups, private Bible studies, pastoral visits, anything of that nature. Outreach is, of course, going out into the community. So the way that would happen was through what we would consider canvassing, except we called it new resident visits. So one of the things that I would do is I'd receive this list of people who had recently moved into Mount Horeb. We would mark on this list where they were on a map, and then I would take them a little gift bag. And I'd knock on their door and I'd say, "Hi, my name's Justin Schrader. I'm from Good News Lutheran Church. The reason I'm here today is from what I understand, you are new in town." Usually they'd say something like, "Yeah," or they'd say, "No, I've been living here for the past 25 years. And I'd say, "Oh, I'm sorry." But after that, I would say, "Well, we just wanted to welcome you to town with this little gift bag. It contains some information and some coupons to the local businesses. It also contains some information at our church. We would love to see you there. I hope you enjoy your time in Mount Horeb." And that was just a nice way to get our name out into the community. It was low stakes, low pressure. No one's really mad when you're giving them a gift bag. Other outreach that we did would be prospect visits. So if someone came and visited the church, a week later, maybe 2 weeks later, I'd go stop by for a visit and just knock and say, "Hello, it was so nice to have you in church. We hope to see you again sometime soon." And then finally, there was the normal administrative work. So this would be something like, uploading our sermons onto our YouTube and Facebook. This would be preparing the bulletins for Sunday. This would be anything of that nature that kind of just gets all lumped together in the category of administration. So that's really the main responsibilities, the main categories that I fit into during Vicar year. But of course, underlying all of this is the Great Commission, right? That the whole goal of everything we're doing is to go out and spread Jesus' name. And so here are some pictures from my Vicar year of the various things I did. Here you can see me. Let's see if this works. Here you can see me teaching a children's sermon. So whoever was up for the sermon that week was responsible for making a little children's devotion that we did during the service. And the whole goal of those was to help the children focus on what the main message or theme of the day was. Here's me with the confirmation students that graduated this past year. We had, 7 students from public school. I also taught confirmation at a local Lutheran elementary school in Madison, and so I got to have the experience both of teaching the kids who went to public school in town in Mount Horeb, which was nice because that's what I was used to. The only confirmation class we had in Georgia was public school confirmation, and then also experience what catechism looks like in a Lutheran elementary school. And both had obviously a lot of wonderful experiences there for me. Here's Pastor Bauer and I with one of our shut-ins, Ruth Duffy. Ruth was just the most wonderful lady. She is 95 and as sharp as a tack. It is incredible to me. And she's always so full of joy, so happy to see us, asks us questions about our family. Often I felt that when I was visiting her, it was much more for me than it was for her, that it was much more of a blessing that I got to go and visit her every time. Here's me teaching a Bible lesson at our soccer camp. That was a big facet of one of our main events that happened, which was soccer camp. So that was a huge outreach event for us every year. And then, of course, this is a new group of members who came through BIC. And then this is actually not Pastor Bauer. That's Jake Borgwart, the vicar who came before me. He's now a pastor in Chicago. But that was us conducting worship together. So that's kind of what vicar year entails from a broad scale of things. So what did my schedule or my week look like as a vicar here at Good News? Well, I was talking with one of the kids that was a member of the church, and we were chatting. He was one of the teenagers, and so he asked me, he said, "Vicar, do you have another job?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He was like, "Well, you're just here on Sunday morning, right? So do you do something else during the week?" So his expectation of what my work week looked like was that. Just church once a week. Sounds like a pretty great gig, right? Just showing up one day a week and I get paid a full-time. No. Of course, that's not what it was. So every week I'd be in the office. My in-office hours were required from 9 to 3. And so that's the time I spent working on things like sermons, prepping Bible studies. Now, of course, if I fell behind in work, some of that would be carried with me home and I'd work on it at night. But those were my in-office hours. So if someone from the church wanted to see me, wanted to talk to me, if Pastor Bauer needed to know where I would be in church during those hours. Now outside of that, of course, there would be something like sometimes I'd schedule a shut-in visit during the day or in the morning during some of those office hours. But then there's confirmation. So Tuesday mornings, I taught confirmation class at the area Lutheran elementary school, or the Lutheran elementary school. And then on Wednesday nights, I teach confirmation class to our public school students. Additionally, there would be small group gatherings that I'd be a part of. That was a big part of the ministry there at Good News, was small group gatherings, because in these small groups, whether they gathered for fun or fellowship or service or just devotion, these are a big part of getting people involved and closer together as members of a congregation. Then there would be canvassing. Usually 2 nights a week, I would go out and do either those new resident visits or prospect visits. Sometimes those would change. I would interchange those with visiting a member. And then, of course, Pastor Bauer wanted me to get involved in the community in some way outside of just being involved in the church. So the way that I did that was by coaching soccer at the local high school. I was not the head coach. I was just an assistant coach, and I wasn't necessarily there every single day, but it was a really great opportunity. I played soccer throughout high school and college, and so to continue having this thing that I was really passionate about, but to be able to use it to form relationships in the community was a really wonderful opportunity for me. That's one of the biggest things that was instilled in me over the course of my year. That what matters deeply, deeply, deeply is not just throwing the gospel at people, but forming genuine relationships with people. Because the people you care about, you inevitably want to share the gospel with them. So that's what my week normally looked like. Now, things could change depending on if there was a canvassing event going on a Saturday before we had a big church service coming up, or if things could interchange in the evenings. But generally, I would say I was working probably between 40 and 50 hours a week. Not a crazy amount, a pretty normal amount, but Pastor Bauer told me at the beginning of the year, by the way, you're still a vicar. So you shouldn't be working more than this much, because if you are, there's a problem here. So, Good News Lutheran Church itself. Good News was the daughter of a church resurrection in Verona. So the people of this church in Verona saw that there was a need for a church in Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb is further west outside of Madison than Verona. It's a town of about 7,000, and they had a bunch of members who had been commuting from Mount Horeb to Resurrection. And so eventually, as the group got larger and larger, they decided that we should start a mission here. We should daughter a congregation in Mount Horeb. So it started in 2013. That's when this mission officially started getting underway. They received mission funding from Synod, I think a year later, or a little bit less. And then in 2022, after years of worshiping in a storefront, Pastor Bauer took the call there, I believe in 2014. He celebrated 10 years of ministry at Good News in Mount Horeb during my first couple of weeks there. And so 10 years later, or not quite 10 years later, they had this wonderful new building built and dedicated. So they had moved out of a storefront. Now Good News is about 280 members. I would say they worship anywhere between 120 and 160 or 170 a week. Sometimes those numbers will jump up a lot higher. Sometimes they'll dip down a little bit lower depending on the weekend. But they've been growing consistently since they started. When I talk about the ministry at Good News, it's good to structure it around 4 main, what I would call outreach events. So of course there is Christmas and Easter. You know, you expect more people who are not normally in church, visitors on those 2 days, because those are the 2 high festivals of the church year. The year that people come to church because that's the thing you do. So of course those are 2 key tenets of ministry at Good News. But then there were 2 other events, one being our fall festival and the other being our soccer camp. We structured Sundays around these other 2 events during the course of the year to serve as outreach opportunities, not only for us who are on the staff at Good News, but also for the members to encourage and invite friends to come to Good News. So starting out, leading up to Fall Festival, you can see I have 4 things here. Discovery Days, Fall Kickoff, Good News groups, and then finally the Fall Festival itself. So Discovery Days was a program that we started this summer. The whole goal was to reach some of the younger families that we weren't reaching in soccer camp. Basically, these were single-day camps in which each day had a theme. So maybe one day was Discover Water. And so we would bring in a local person like a plumber and an electrician who talked about water with these kids for a little while. There would be a devotion connected to water. Then there would be fun time, like a fun kit or something that they could take home, also in some way connected to water. If I remember right, I think we had them paint their own little wooden sailboats that could float in the water. And then finally, there was some outside time for the kids just to have fun. And so the nice thing about these Discovery Days was it was an opportunity both to share Jesus with these kids, but also to meet families that we maybe weren't meeting during the course of soccer camp. So this was once a week in June through July. So soccer camp takes place during July. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But these were going on over the course of 2 months, just a day each week. Then there's the fall kickoff weekend. So this is kind of the big, almost ministry start to the year at Good News. Of course, the church calendar ends not till November, but the beginning of the year, in a way, feels like the fall kickoff event, partly because this coincides with the new vicar arriving at Good News. The whole goal of this was to kick off both our small groups, to garner interest in the Bible studies that we were teaching, whether they be teen or adult, and then finally to register the kids for Sunday school and to install our Sunday school teachers. So involved in this was I had to come up with a game to get help the kids get to know me a little bit and get to know my wife Alyssa. There you can see her on the bottom teaching Sunday school, and then also to garner interest in our small groups. So small groups are a big part of Good News' ministry. These small groups go under 3 categories: connect, grow, or impact. So connect groups are anything involving fun and fellowship. For example, Alyssa and I hosted a connect group that was called Thursday Night Football. And all it was we had people over at our house for Thursday Night Football, and we provided some snacks and some refreshments, and they could come over and watch the game. It was low stakes, low pressure, but it was a good opportunity for Alyssa and I to get to know some of the other members at Good News. There are other connect groups, like there's a men's card night. There's a group of retired guys who get together on Wednesday mornings at Good News and just have coffee. And actually what they do now is they chat about the upcoming readings for the week in church. Grow groups are the groups that are centered around devotional life. So these would be like women's Bible study or any Bible study outside of the normal Sunday morning event. So I led a Bible study in spring called Reason for God, taking a look at Tim Keller's Reason for God book and looking at the plausibility and claims of Christianity outside of just the realm of faith. And then finally, there's impact groups. These are our service groups, getting involved in the community in ways other than devotional life or just fellowship. So, for example, this year, one of our impact groups called the Compassion Crew heard about this young man who has Down syndrome. He takes care of chickens. He sells the eggs to local stores in the area. A lightning storm happened in Mount Horeb and burned down his chicken coop. And so what this impact group did was they got together, they pooled some resources, and they helped fund the rebuilding of his coop and the purchasing of new chickens for this young man so that he can continue running his business. And so the whole goal, again, there is to actually help people with real need in real situations. So all of these groups get launched in fall. There's 2 different launch dates for the groups. We have 1 round of groups in fall, 1 round of groups in spring. That doesn't mean that people can't gather or get together in group settings outside of this. It's just to put a little bit of a shelf life on some of these groups. So for example, if I'm running a limited Bible study, I'm not going to do that Bible study perpetually through the whole entire year. No, it'll only be for a couple weeks. And so then, when spring comes, a new Bible study might roll around. If you weren't interested in that one, maybe you'll be interested in this one. And then finally, there's the fall festival itself. So before the fall festival, during those new resident visits and during any of the prospect visits and outreach events, we are giving out information, we are putting up information around town about the fall festival that we are having. So you can see here kids painting pumpkins. We sell caramel apples. There's a coffee truck that comes in that Good News pays for, and people can get free coffee, whatever they want, for the entire time the truck's there. We get in a couple other food trucks to come in and sell lunch for the people who are on site for the fall festival. There's usually a petting zoo. The year I was there, it rained, and so the petting zoo had to be brought inside, and so in the back room there were all these little baby chicks and some little baby rabbits and 2 young goats. So that was really cool. This past year, it was a lot bigger, mostly because they could have it outside again. And so a fire truck comes by, there is a hay ride on a tractor. So it's a really wonderful event, and it's centered around this worship service where we invite this Lutheran CCLI orchestra to come in and to play music. So there's a small devotion, a normal service with this music involved, and people want to come and just listen to them play. And so it's a good opportunity both, again, to be in our community, but also to be in our community for a very specific purpose. And that purpose is, of course, sharing the good news about who Jesus is. The next main area or calendar time would be Advent, or I should say Christmas. It culminates in the Christmas service, but there are quite a few things leading up to it. So again, you can see here that there's a canvassing event. Now these canvassing events were different than the everyday canvassing that Pastor and I would do during our normal weeks. Instead, these were opportunities for the individual members of Good News to actually get involved, going out and knocking on some doors in the community. Usually, what would happen is we would do these new resident visits, except maybe Pastor or I would accompany someone, or someone who was used to doing this kind of thing would accompany someone who hadn't done it before. And so we get out into the community and share that, hey, this is what we have coming up at Good News. One of these events is Cheers to Advent. And so Good News doesn't have weekly Advent services. Instead, to kick off Advent, we have an event called Cheers to Advent, where there's a baking competition for sweets and appetizers. There is a hymn sing in the church at night. And additionally, there's a small devotion from Pastor. Also, this is the time that we put out our Advent devotional material. So instead of having weekly Advent services, the vicar is responsible for putting together a devotional material to lead up to Christmas. And then in addition to this devotional material that I put together, I'd write short devotions, record them, and then post them onto our Facebook page so that people could have something to listen to during the week. We'd also do Christmas caroling in addition to the canvassing. And so the caroling would be put together by our choir director. She would ask people if they'd be willing to carol, and then we'd go to a couple different areas. So one of the things Pastor Bauer and I did over the course of my vicar year was that every other week, one of us would be at a memory care facility giving a devotion. These are pretty short, pretty simple devotions. The entire service itself wouldn't last 30 minutes. But then, come Christmas time, we would come there to this memory care facility with our whole choir and sing Christmas carols. And then we'd go to the other nursing homes and sing Christmas carols. And finally, to some of our shut-ins and prospects houses to spread a little Christmas cheer their way. And then finally, there's a Christmas concert that goes on right before Christmas itself. This is the same band, the Lutheran CCLI Orchestra, that we get for our fall festival. And so this one is more of a concert, whereas the CCLI Orchestra, when they come for our fall festival, that was more of an actual just worship service. This is a concert with a brief devotion at the beginning by Pastor Bauer. And so you can see this hosted. We had a really, really great turnout that year, well over 200 people in attendance, which kind of was pushing the limits of what the sanctuary could handle. And then finally, there's the Christmas service itself, right? All of this is leading up in the hopes that people come and hear the good news that God came to dwell among man, that God took on flesh to be one of us so that he could live for us and die for us. So that all culminates in the year with this Christmas service. The next main event is Holy Week and Easter. So out of all the events, I would say this is pretty much the most typical or standard when compared to every other Wells church, or probably the Wells churches you know, that over the course of this season, we're having midweek Lenten services, that we are gathering together normally on Sunday, that there's a canvassing event before Holy Week itself actually starts, and then finally it culminates in Easter Sunday, where we also have like a big breakfast, a sunrise service, the breakfast in between, and then a normal service. So spring sessions of Good News groups occur once again at the beginning of this new, I would call it almost semester of the church year. So we start our spring Good News groups. Again, those are the Grow, Impact, and Connect groups that anyone can head and anyone can start. Then there's the midweek Lenten services. And so the unique thing about our midweek Lenten services is instead of everyone gathering together and the whole church throwing the potluck, the individual Good News groups, if they so desire, no one is pressured, no one is forced to do this, but if a Good News group wants to, they can gather together and provide the Lenten potluck for everyone else. And so, for example, the men's card night, which is a big group of guys who get together and play cards once a month on Saturday, they sponsored a grill out for one of our Lenten meals. They brought a grill to Good News, like 100 brats, I think 50 burgers, and that was what that meal looked like. And so that's what happens during the week. Also during this time, it's a good opportunity for the vicars in the area to enter into a rotation with the other churches. So I wasn't just spending my time on an island alone at Good News. Within my circuit, or within the other people in the immediate vicinity, there were two other of my classmates, two other vicars, one in downtown Madison at the chapel there, and then one actually at the church that mothered Good News at Resurrection in Verona. And so during this time, we entered into a Lenten rotation with the other pastors and vicars in the area. So I got the opportunity to preach at Our Redeemer in Madison, and I got the opportunity to preach at Resurrection in Verona, as well as the other church down in Monroe. And then finally, well, not finally, canvassing and Easter preparation also occurred. So this was another one of these fun teen events. The teens gathered together and they would dye eggs, and then while they're dyeing eggs, a lot of the adults would go out and do another one of these canvassing events that precedes one of the major events at our church. So, just like with Christmas, or just like with our fall festival, on a Saturday we'd get together, we'd probably have some lunch and some fun, and then we'd go out and just tell people about what's going on at the church this upcoming Sunday. Usually it was about a week before that would happen, just to keep it fresh in people's minds, because if you go too much earlier, people will forget it. And if you go too much later, well, then they're going to say, I'm not going to go to this thing that's 2 days from now. And so usually the Saturday 8 days before the upcoming event, that's when we do these canvassing events. Then, of course, there's Easter Sunday itself. Here's a picture of, this is when Alyssa was now further along in her pregnancy than when the year started. Yeah, so Easter service is very, very much like what you'd expect. There's, like I said, the sunrise service, and that's a really wonderful opportunity. And then there's a breakfast in between where people from the church sign up and bring different items, whether it's egg bakes or a French toast bake or little donuts or fruit or whatever, and we have that. And then, of course, there's the normal Easter service that occurs. The final area of the year, the final main event, would be soccer camp. So the vicar is heavily involved in the planning and prep of the soccer camp. This is kind of almost like the capstone project of vicar year. Basically, pastor is the one who's in charge, but I'm the one who's responsible for making sure everything kind of gets done. And so I'm always answering to him on everything that's happening. So whether it's going out and dropping off yard signs at people's houses that want them in their yards to advertise soccer camp, prepping all the materials that are going to be taught for devotional time with the students, getting ready the soccer curriculum that the coaches are going to teach, organizing the volunteers and asking the volunteers to help. That all is involved in the process of soccer camp. But before soccer camp ever happens, first we have confirmation. So confirmation occurs after Easter, usually at Good News, sometime in May. This year, again, we had 8 young confirmands. Next year, I think there's going to be 15 confirmands, which is just a wonderful thing. 15 young people being confirmed. Then on Ascension Day, so instead of a traditional church service on Ascension Day, we have a pig roast. So what that means is they go out and buy a large pig. We smoke it all day, And then people come to church for this big potluck event meal. And anyone from the community is invited too. And so it's another one of these great outreach opportunities where it's still Christ-centered, but with an excuse for people to come. Because it's harder to say, hey, you should be at church on Ascension to someone who doesn't go to church at all. But to say, hey, why don't you come by this church? We're roasting a pig all day, and maybe you'll also hear a little bit about Jesus. It just gives people an excuse to get in the door so that we can share the good news about Jesus with them. We also participate in a summer frolic parade of Mount Horeb. So summer frolic is this big parade that anyone can get a spot in. So what Good News does is we pull a thing that advertises for our soccer camp during this frolic parade. In addition to that, we have water bottles that we hand out to people in the crowd who are watching the parade, as well as these little foam soccer balls that the kids love that we toss out. So again, it's another good opportunity just to get exposure. So the soccer camp itself is 4 days in July. Usually these soccer camps operate under a theme. So our theme this year was perfect aim, how nothing can separate us from God's love because God has his aim perfectly directed on each and every one of us. That aim was perfect when his son Jesus came to live and to die and to rise from us. And that aim continues to be perfect as God continues to sustain and preserve us here and now. It's usually around 100 kids from the community, and so it's a pretty big turnout. And the majority of them are not members. I would say we probably have 20 of those kids, so about a fifth who are members of the church, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. But the rest of them are all from within the community of Mount Horeb. The wonderful thing about an event like a soccer camp is that it kind of as it continues and as it gains traction, more and more people come, especially in a small town like Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb is only about 7,000 people. Now there's more people in the surrounding area, but when we talk about Mount Horeb itself, it's a pretty small, pretty tight-knit community. So the benefit of something like this is that word of mouth spreads very, very quickly. And so if a parent hears that another parent's child had a wonderful time at this soccer camp, you can bet the next year that their kid will also be in soccer camp. Parents in Mount Horeb really, really love occupying their kids' time with different camps during the summer. And so ours is another one that helps fill in that spot and then get our name out there. Players learn soccer, of course, at our soccer camp, except one of the things that we keep in mind is that this is a low-stakes soccer camp. So this is not like the kids who are going to go play college soccer somewhere. No, instead the whole goal here is just to help them have some fun and basically to offer some daycare during the afternoon that their parents otherwise wouldn't have, or that would be leagues more expensive somewhere else. But of course, the real goal is Bible lessons and then the hymn that we have. So the whole goal of having Bible lessons and then this hymn that we sing together is that when Sunday comes, the Sunday after soccer camp, we throw a big barbecue. So there's a church service in which the children sing this song that they have been practicing all week, and then there's a barbecue afterwards where parents can come and enjoy food and fellowship, both with the children and then also with the members of Good News. And so the whole goal is to keep them grounded in God's word throughout this whole time. Soccer is secondary. The whole point is to form relationships with these students, or with these, young children, so that we can teach them about who their Savior is. So here's a picture of our whole camp. You can see we have a lot of volunteers and a lot of kids. It's a really wonderful opportunity that not only do we get volunteers from within our church, but the kids who age out of soccer camp, that is, they become too old to be a part of it, often come back and volunteer. So even if those children aren't necessarily going to the church yet, they're already forming a relationship with the church. They know who pastor is. They know who I am. They know who the other kids who belong to the church are. And they're being witnessed to, not always directly, but sometimes indirectly by just letting our Christian character shine. So this is what the year looks like at Good News if I were to sum it up as a whole. And here's the thing. If I were to give a summary or one point to what Good News is not unique because it offers the best programs. Good News is not unique because it has the best people involved or the most willing lay members or the best pastor or anything else. No, Good News is just like every other church. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing to not be unique because it's a recognition of who we are, that everything we do is secondary because it's all in service to Him, to Jesus. That the whole point of everything we do is not just to offer nice things because they're nice, but to do this in the service to the glory of God so that we can hopefully tell people, even if it's just one time, about who their Savior is and what he has done for them. And so as you think today, especially on a day like a mission festival, about what your church can do, your church doesn't have to start doing every single program available under the sun. The whole point of being a church is just to share the good news about Jesus with those around you. That's what it's like to be a vicar in mission setting. I know that was a lot of information thrown at you all at once, but if you have any questions, I would love to answer them. They do. So one of the really nice things about being a vicar in mission setting is not necessarily, or just a vicar in general, is that our housing gets subsidized by the synod, so like by wells. So we don't necessarily, some places have spots that are already bought, that they just own, and then it kind of operates like a parsonage, and so they kind of just live there. Other places kind of have places that have been handed down. So for Alyssa and I, our experience was that a member who is a chiropractor, she owned this office. But on the back half of this office was basically an apartment and then a basement. So originally this was a house that had been renovated, the front half into a chiropractor office, while the back half still remained a living space. So Alyssa and I lived there. So we had an upper floor and then 2 bedrooms downstairs along with an entire basement. And so that's where we lived. Now, we paid her rent, but then we received like some subsidy from the wells back. So the whole goal during Vicar Year is that students don't, if you got called to, say, an expensive place where the cost of living is very high, that you're not breaking your bank by living there. It's a good question. Yes? You do get paid. I would say it's not very much, but that's not the goal. I mean, when you think about, I mentioned my brother earlier, clinical experience in other places, you're generally not getting paid, so that we get paid at all is honestly a blessing. Like when my brother went out, he actually had to pay to work at this clinic as a student, whereas vicars, we do get a small salary. It's not anything crazy, but it's enough. And then also, my wife, Alyssa, she graduated from MLC as well. She worked as an elementary school teacher across town, across Madison for the year, so we had 2 incomes there. I think it was sometimes a battle of attrition by the system. And I say that because I don't think I ever, when I first graduated from high school, or when I first was in high school, I thought, yeah, maybe I could be a pastor, but I don't know if I'm all that interested in it. And even throughout my time, continuing going forward, I didn't have any aha moment where I suddenly went, this is it. This is what I want to do. But it was through the encouragement of my profs, both at Luther Prep and then at Martin Luther College. It was through the encouragement of my own father, who was a pastor, but he was my pastor. So the encouragement of my professors, the encouragement of my pastors, and then the encouragement of my friends and fellow Christians that were around me, that really led me down this path. Because every time I thought about, well, do I really want to be a pastor? Is this really the thing I want to do? I thought about how wonderful it is to be just so saturated in my faith, surrounded by these people who not only share common values with me because we're from similar places or like similar things, but we share the deepest thing, which is the commonality of our faith. And so as I continued along in this path, more and more it became the kind of thing where it wasn't like, oh, aha, that was the moment. But now I recognize fully that there is nothing else that I would rather do, because I get to deal with what I think is the most important thing in the world. But the beauty of this is that, the beauty of pastoral ministry, is that I get to do that. But the most wonderful thing is that I also get to tell you about how you can do that. How that we all share this common faith, and we all have this duty and this privilege to go out and share the good news about Jesus. And it's honestly sometimes even better coming from someone who's not a pastor than from someone who's a pastor. I always remember, I get paid to do this, or I will. But to hear from a dear friend, or a colleague, or a coworker, or a peer, who Jesus is and why you care about him and why he matters for your life, well, that speaks volumes. That speaks volumes to everyone around you. And so I kind of started answering your question and went on a tangent. But what made me decide to become a pastor was the continued encouragement from the people around me. It's just from my pastor, from my professors, and then from my friends. And that continued encouragement, I think, is the best thing you could offer for any young person considering entering the public ministry. If you think someone has those gifts, don't be afraid to say, have you ever thought about maybe being a teacher? Because you could really, really do a good job at that. Have you ever thought that you might have the gifts to be a pastor? That speaks volumes to young students. Any other questions?
You served in a mission vicar role. Will you expect to have a mission congregation?
That's an interesting question. I would say I wouldn't expect that right off the bat, namely because there's a lot of vicar and mission settings. I would say over a third of my class was in a vicar and mission setting program, which is a great thing because what that means is that no matter where I go, if I go to a new mission, if God blesses me in that way, or if God blesses me with an already established congregation, I have the principles in mind of what it means to do outreach. That every church is really a mission field, no matter if you get called to what you consider to be the most exotic place or not. All of these places are full of people where the harvest is ripe, but the workers are few. And so I kind of have no expectations for call day because I think if I did, I'm going to set myself up for disappointment. And so instead, I prayerfully look forward to whatever the Conference of Presidents decides I will best be suited and fit. Good question. Any other questions? If not, thank you for this opportunity to come out and tell you what it means to be a vicar in mission setting. It was a really influential year on me, and God blessed me and my family tremendously through it. And I hope God continues to bless you and your families through the work, not only of your pastors faithfully administering to you God's word, but also through the work of your wider synod. As a church body, we stand together. We are not alone. And so that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Thank you. A little different than Mount Horeb.
Middle of New York, but certainly just to watch those young men and to see them and to be there. And we do have the offering for that, for the mission, vicar and mission setting back there. And also there's information just on world missions and home missions on that back table there. So God's blessings.
Thank you. Yeah, it's what started out as, but I did it years ago, which is kind of nice. Honestly, the 3 weeks at a time, it's a little bit
Church, and so we'd have to try to get together to do these sermon preps, and I was writing on little notepads and computers. It's like, yeah. Yep, in a couple weeks. Yeah, I can put this all back so we can go hopefully for the next year. Okay. Now we have to move parsonage because there was no pastor in the church. A lot of space for it.
guess you